Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Café New Canadians. This session is brought to you by New Canadians in collaboration with WoodGreen Community Connections. New Canadians is a TV and web-based series for newcomers to Canada. Through its nationally aired TV show and digital platforms, New Canadians informs and educates newcomers and immigrants about settlement, education, employment resources, and services to help them with their journey here, as well as immigration news and success stories. You can watch New Canadians every week on Omni Television across Canada. You can also visit their website at newcanadians.tv or their YouTube channel, where this session is currently being live streamed. This session is also being brought to you by WoodGreen Community Connections. And with us, we have Teresa Tao with the program, who's going to tell us a little bit about their program. Over to you, Teresa.
Okay, thank you, Darrell. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Teresa from WoodGreen's Community Connections program as the Group Activities Coordinator. That's a very long title. So before we get started with tonight's show, first of all, I'd like to really express our great honor and pleasure to co-present tonight's event with Café New Canadians. Something I'd like to briefly share with you about our program services. First of all, it's a very unique program that's 100% volunteer driven. The staff team is very small. So as a staff, I am responsible for programming design, but all the actual service are delivered by our Canadian volunteers who are such an amazing team. They are the ones who actually provide real person-to-person interactions and engagement to help newcomer professionals with their career success and full integration into the Canadian society. So the type of services that we offer right now is during the COVID-19 situation we're still in. So everything's done remotely, virtually. So some of the services that we do offer include career mentorship and group mentorship. And we also have English conversation circles, French conversation circles, professional networking events, panel career events such as tonight's event. We also have career coaching seminars, job and career related special projects, communication skills training workshops, as well as newcomer wellness and live coaching sessions. So the list actually goes on and on. We always create something new and something innovative to meet the actual needs of our newcomer participants. So that's just in a nutshell, a very simple explanation about what our program is and the type of services that we do offer. And then now I'd like to, let's get the show started. Let's go get back to you, Darrell.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa.
You're welcome. One more thing I'd like to add is that Darrell is actually a superstar volunteer of our program for many years. Thank you again. Thank you.
Now I've got a reputation to live up to, since Teresa, you put it out there. But thank you for that. So my name is Darrell Pinto. I'm the VP of Research and Industry Advancement at the Canadian Venture Capital and Private Equity Association. And as Teresa just mentioned, a quite active volunteer with WoodGreen Community Connections. I'm really excited about today's panelists. We have three brilliant professionals who came to Canada from different points on the planet. Katrina Gagan, Director and Head of National Client Group at National Bank, Ramya Ramanathan, the editor of Canadian Immigrant magazine, and Laura Mannix, who's joining us from Vancouver, the west coast of Canada. Laura Mannix, Director of Community Development at Diversity Community Resources Society. So welcome all of you, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to encourage our audience. I want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to type those in. And you can do that either if you're on the Zoom platform in the Q&A tab, or if you're on the YouTube live stream channel, the live chat option, okay? And I'll relay those questions to the panelists depending on how much time we have. So I'd like to start with intros. And Laura, I'm going to maybe get you to start. If you can tell us a little bit about what you do and what inspired your move to Canada, and then where in the world you kind of trace your roots from before coming here.
Wow, that's a big question all in one. So thank you so much, Darrell, and hello to everyone who's joining us online. My name is Laura Mannix, as Darrell mentioned, and I'm the Director of Community Development at Diversity Community Resources Society. And we're located in BC, and we support refugee and immigrants making their home and livelihoods in Canada, particularly in the Surrey area, which is located on the territories of the Semiahmoo, Katzie, Kwantlen, Kwakwut, and Tsawwassen First Nations. And it's really important for us to centre the work centre the voices of the local First Nations that we work with, particularly as we welcome migrants to Canada. And I would have to say that, you know, I immigrated from Australia, but I don't have a typical Australian experience. I'm actually the product of an Egyptian mother and an Irish father. And that has certainly shaped the way that I view migration, and particularly the work that I do in diversity. And I would have to say, sorry, Darrell, can I just ask the last part of your question, because it was a lot.
Yeah, sorry about that. So tell us what
Okay.
motivated or inspired your move to Canada.
Yeah, I'd have to say that, you know, my lived experience has a lot of privilege in the immigration process compared to, I think, a lot of other folks. The fact that English was my first language, I chose to relocate. Even though I'm mixed heritage, I'm light skinned. So I just want to preface that with that, you know, I came here by choice, actually through love. My partner was actually from Canada. He's actually Métis. And so that's what brought me here. And I would have to say that, you know, growing up in a biracial family, in a bicultural family, and particularly seeing the experience of my mother, who came to Australia from Egypt during a time of when the white Australian policy was just demolished in Australia. Her immigrant experience, her settlement experience, was really that of, you know, trying to assimilate and trying to, you know, become as Australian as possible. And, you know, it didn't really enable my family to show up in their entire way as far as their language and culture during that time. And so that heavily influences the work that we do at Diversity, because I can see that sometimes when, you know, immigrants or refugees arrive here in Canada, that pressure of trying to be as Canadian as possible. And so I would say that, you know, when I compare Australia to Canada, there is still, you know, some similarities there as far as like some systemic issues that we see around, particularly around injustices with Indigenous populations and protectionist, you know, immigration policies, colonial structures. So, you know, there are some similarities there. And then when I think about the Egyptian aspect of my identity, that is very much a collective culture, it sometimes can be in conflict to the more individualistic culture that we can sometimes see here in Canada.
Right. Well, thanks, Laura. That's an amazing matrix of roots that you have. And I think it really is a reflection of the Canadian diversity that I find so compelling about this country. You mentioned you're half Irish, which actually leads me a nice segue over to Katrina, who's, I think, 100% Irish, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think I'm probably 100,000%. Yeah, there's nothing else back there. fully Irish, I believe.
So Katrina, how about you? If you want to maybe introduce yourself and answer the same question, what motivated the move to Canada and
Sure.
your roots?
Yeah, sure. So my move to Canada was never meant to be a long-term move. It was always meant to be just a short 1-year thing. And we moved here, my husband and I, or he was then my boyfriend, in 2012. And at the time there was a recession in Ireland, and, it was fairly, not bleak, but, there weren't a load of job prospects and opportunities. I had been working with an Irish bank since around 2007, and, I was working within their North American corporate banking division. And I had the opportunity to go on a couple of secondments over to their New York office, which I really loved. And the intention was that I would move there over time permanently. But then, unfortunately, the economy tanked in Ireland, and the Irish bank decided that they would, pull roots out of that particular division. And I ended up working in a workout group in the Irish bank, and it was okay for a year, and I liked it, but it was not what I wanted to do at the time. So my husband and I, we basically sat down and said, why don't we go away for a year and just get some life experience, go and live somewhere different, and come back to Ireland afterwards. And I guess at the time, a lot of young Irish people were emigrating from the country because of the recession and because there weren't that many opportunities. And 2 places were kind of the main places that people were going, and that was Australia and Canada, just because of the fact that there was an ability to get a working holiday visa in either of those places fairly easily as an Irish citizen or a European citizen. So we kind of sat down and went through the different pros and cons of each of the different places that we could potentially go. And we decided upon Canada, and it was for a few different reasons, but, basically because, first off, it was a shorter flight, a shorter time difference between Ireland and Canada. I had experience working in kind of North America with some Canadian experience in my job, so I thought I'll probably find it a little bit easier to get some work there. Honestly, we had no connections at all. Like, we literally didn't know anybody in Canada. We basically had each other and 2 suitcases. That is it, I swear to God. And we left. I'll never forget Dublin Airport. Our 2 mothers drove us to the airport, and they were waving us goodbye, and they were crying and saying, this is it. You're going to love Canada. You're going to stay there forever, and you're never going to come home. And we're like, nah, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Of course we're going to be home in 1 year. So I guess my mother always likes to say that she's right about everything, and I guess she got this one because it's 8 years later and we're still here. So I guess what inspired the move, I guess it was a vacation that has turned into an 8-year trip at this point, and I guess we're getting more settled every year.
That's amazing. So amazing connections already between Australia and Ireland, between the 2 panelists. Ramya, I know you're an avid traveler. Do you have any connection with Australia and or Ireland? You're on mute, Ramya.
Mute. Okay.
Perfect.
So I've been to 38 countries, but I've never been to Ireland or Australia. So on my list. So first of all, let me apologize for the flickering screen. It wasn't meant to happen, but if it annoys you, just type it in the chat box and I'll unblock myself so you don't have to see the flicker. So first of all, thank you, Darrell, Gerard, and Teresa for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm originally from India, and I work in communications, knowledge dissemination, and cause marketing. So I'd call myself a storyteller, and I'm in the nonprofit and the international development and media space. So I've worked in 6 countries around the world, so I'm a bit of a nomad. India, Canada, US, back to Switzerland, Canada, Denmark, Myanmar, and Canada. So Katrina, I know what living out of suitcases are. And so I'm very cause-driven, and I work with a range of social issues. So what do I do right now? I'm the editor of Canadian Immigrant. We're a magazine and a website, and CanadianImmigrant.ca. And we provide newcomers and immigrants with information and resources to make settlement easier. And I'm also currently consulting. I consult on and off with international development organizations. Right now, it's with a UN agency that works with cooperation among countries in the global South. And so helping disseminate knowledge through social media and non-digital media. And I'm also on the advisory board. It's a global advisory network of a US-based nonprofit called World Pulse Media. I was one of the founding members 15 years ago when I lived in New York, and now I'm just on the advisory council. So in all the work I do, it's a lot of different kinds of work, and I do a lot of contract-based work, which I love, because there's more opportunity to explore. There's, I can bring my skills in. It's a very different way of life, but you have to be prepared for the uncertainty of it all. So I like, the reason I do what I do is I like connecting with people from different cultures, communities, and listening to different voices. And my work, but all my work is focused on the importance of media, technology, and communications in providing a platform to building community and facilitating positive change. So,
That's awesome.
Do you want to say why Canada? Okay, why Canada? Yeah. It was very much by chance. I came here 20 years ago, 1999, but I didn't live here. I came on a youth exchange program. So I could have matched to a work opportunity in any country because you sign up, you interview, and then they match you to a job. So my friend who applied with me went to Kiev in Ukraine, and I came to Ottawa in Canada. So I finished my exchange, and when you come on a youth exchange, you learn a lot about a country. You go to universities, you meet young people, you do a lot of different things. So I found that I aligned deeply with Canada's roots, but I never planned to come back. I finished my exchange, I left, I studied in the US, I worked in Europe, and at one point I wanted to unpack my suitcases. So I decided, you know what? Canada is where I align the most, so I'm gonna come back. And I decided to call it home. Yeah, those were your questions, Darrell.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you got to try a few countries out before figuring out Canada is the place where I wanna, end up. You used the word nomad, and I wanna spend some time talking about that, because in your experience, and Katrina came here with 2 suitcases, and Laura talked about being in Australia and not quite feeling that she needed to fit in, but not quite. In your travels as a nomad, have you upskilled yourself in this, trying to find roots? I mean, talk about that experience since you've been in Canada. Ramya, I'm going to ask you first.
So finding roots. Yes, have I found roots in Canada? Absolutely. But, there was this one situation. I had a boss once, Senator Ratna Omidwar. She launched a book about refugee stories. So I don't know if I've told you the story, Darrell, but I was at this launch, and somebody was asking me, this couple was asking me, well, where is home? And I said, I don't know, I don't know where home is, and I'm lost. And I started blah, blah, blah. And then they looked at me and I said, well, I don't know which of my countries is home. And they said, we lived on the border of the Thai-Burma border for 25 years. And we just came to Canada. So they said, you're lucky, you have so many homes. So here I am complaining about not having a home because, I can't decide. And they're telling me, well, you have like all these homes you've lived in, so you should be lucky. So yeah, but that was a few years ago. I consider I have 2 homes. One is India and one is Canada.
That's great. And it's a small world because I co-chair now with Senator Ratna Omidwar, a refugee roundtable. She's a wonderful personality, and I'm glad to hear that that was one of your initial experiences here. Katrina, how about you? In terms of this, quickly developing roots, coming here with 2 suitcases and knowing no one, I mean, what were your strategies in the early months to years?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about coming to a country where you don't know anybody, I mean, I came with my husband. There are people who come completely on their own and they have to kind of branch out from there. So it wasn't that difficult, but I don't feel very sorry for myself. But the great thing about coming and not knowing other people is the fact that you're forced into developing networks and circles. And while we don't have any family here, we have developed a friend group, which we would consider to be our Canadian family. And we have become friends with people from all sorts of cultures who have invited us into their extended family, and their parents consider us to be like almost like their children now. And, it's an amazing feeling really to be so accepted. And I mean, everybody talks about the fact that Canada is so multicultural, and it's so true. And it's very obvious that there are many generations of roots within Canada of different types of cultures, all kind of living harmoniously together. And I have really felt that coming in as I don't want to call myself an outsider because I really don't feel that way now at this stage. But at the same time, I'm I've been living here for 8 years. My husband and I got Canadian permanent residency around 4 years ago, but we're still not Canadian citizens technically, so we don't have the passports as of yet, but we're eligible to apply, and we will apply now at some point. It's just a matter of getting the paperwork done. But I think at the end of the day, for me, I'm always going to feel Irish because my roots are Irish. All of our families still live in Ireland. That's where we grew up. We have such fond connections there. And I think no matter how long I live anywhere else, I'm always going to feel that way. But how lucky would I be to have dual citizenship both in Canada and in Ireland, two amazing countries. And I feel as though, back to Ramia's point as well, like it's so amazing to have home and roots in multiple different countries. So I have to say I'm pretty proud to be kind of having roots in both sides now at this stage.
That's great. And Laura, your experience in terms of your early strategies to try and build a network here and find roots. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Similarly to what my lovely panelists had mentioned, there's when I also arrived, I had my partner here who was actually, grew up here. So there was that level of comfort, like Katrina had just mentioned. But, I did still feel, the usual, I think, migrant experience is when you leave a home and your family is not with you and you don't have community, it can be quite isolating in building that community up. And I also acknowledge that, if you have language barriers on top of that, that can be even further compounding, which I see with a lot of friends of mine and the community that we work with. But my own lived experience, again, pointing to that privilege that I was able to look at opportunities in the community that enabled me just to connect with anyone, and that included like volunteering. I got involved in a lot of local initiatives that have enabled me to meet like-minded people, and just reaching out to them and engaging folks that I would meet in through volunteering or through work. So the first position or job that I got in Canada, which was very much, I would say, more of a survival job. It wasn't in my chosen field of interest, but it enabled me to meet folks and build that community. But it did take a lot of time. I would say, I've been now in Canada for 7 years, and it's only the past year or 2 years that I've found my people, that really strong community to make me feel held.
So thank you, Laura. Katrina mentioned, it's such a benefit to have your feet in two countries here. You get the benefits of both worlds. I have a question here from the audience that looks at guilt. I'll just read out the question. So, does any of you suffer from immigrant guilt, especially if you have parents back home?
Oh my God, all the time. And I would say there's a specific guilt that comes from Egyptian mothers as well. But yeah, and I mean, I joke. I think my mother, she was so beautiful, and I think this is the sentiment of a lot of migrant families. She left everything in her home country to come to Australia, and she wanted to give everything that she couldn't have to her own children. So she's always provided me with so much encouragement to go out and see the world and do the things that she did not have the opportunity to do. But every day, yeah, I feel a piece of my heart is always missing when I'm not with them. So the guilt it's real.
Ramya, you mentioned, India is just as equal to Canada's home. Do you experience the same thing as Laura?
So I did experience immigrant guilt. Absolutely fabulous question. But you know what? You have to put your feet where you are. And something incredible happened last year. Instead of going for the usual 10 days to visit my family, I went for 2 months. I can work from anywhere remotely. I just have to work at night if it's this time zone. So I went there, And my parents are, knock on wood, they have a vibrant life. They have aunts and sisters, and they have a gorgeous garden. They're running around, and they have like the garbage collector comes down the road. These are small communities, right, in India, and they say, "Oh, who's that? That's your daughter?" And oh, she's here, and they know all about me, and there is that sense of community, right? So my parents are well taken care of. They're, knock on wood. I don't want to, and they're active. And then me, I used to work nights. I'd sleep during the day, be so tired. And my parents would be like, "Why are you so tired?" And staying there has removed all the guilt. Just go back to the person who asked the question. Your parents are stronger than you think. Your family is stronger than, assuming they're financially okay and they have a network. It gets harder if you just have one parent, but if it's a couple and they have their family, they actually are in a better place than you are. I promise you, because you're probably, let's say you're new here, 5 years, 10 years, you're building community, but they probably have a vibrant community that they already have because they haven't immigrated. They have their childhood friends, they have, you have to think, you have to be practical about this, because they're strong. Your parents are not, weak. They're strong people, believe me.
Great. Katrina, anything to add from your perspective to that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's the guilt of being away from your family and, not being there for a lot of big events that happen. Like, for example, my nephew, I don't get to see him growing up, and there's so many things that, like, I go home often, and that's one of the reasons why it's so great to live somewhere which is away, but not that far away. Because for me, I can go home for a long weekend if I want to, and having spent time here in Canada and progressed into more senior positions with my job, I now have the means and capacity to actually fly home as necessary, and so I do go back there quite frequently. Right now, actually, because of COVID, I hate that I can't go home right now, and I don't have the ability, no matter what happens, to actually fly home without going into quarantines and all of that sort of stuff. So I would say, like, outside of the current situation, I find it very practically easy to get back there, and so I go back for anything that I feel is necessary to go back for. And we spend a lot of time keeping in touch with family and friends on Skype and through calls all the time. Like, I mean, I probably talk to my parents just as much as I did when I lived in Dublin and they were in the west of Ireland. I haven't lived at home for a very long time, not since I was 17 years of age. So, I mean, I've never been living right beside my parents anyway. Definitely guilt, but I have brothers and sisters who live near to my parents, and they're always there, and they're fantastic support, and it definitely is one of the things that makes it easier for me. And you know what, my parents are super supportive. I actually expected that it would be the case that they would constantly be begging us to come back all of the time, but they've been really, really supportive of us living here, and they see how happy we are and how successful our careers have become here in Canada, and so they're very supportive of that.
Now, all three of you talked about your initial anchoring strategies in terms of building your networks and forming roots. Finding a job is one of probably the most important anchors as you transition to a new country. Katrina, tell us about your strategy. Did it take a long time, first of all, and your strategy in landing, your dream job, or the steps you took to get to that? Because not everyone has that dream job as step number one when they come into this country.
Yeah, that is definitely true, and something that I learned after I got here. So, I think getting a job was definitely the biggest obstacle in terms of fitting in and finding my feet here in Canada. I guess my intention was to move here and to get a job with one of the big banks as a corporate banking kind of associate director. That would compare to one of my previous roles that I'd had back in Ireland and working through kind of the North American portfolio that I was on. I thought that I had some great experience to come to Canada, and I thought that I'd be a really desirable candidate and that I would find it very easy to find a role. But I was wrong about that. And I guess I learned that through, I guess I could honestly say that I've applied for hundreds of jobs at the start of when I first arrived here online through different kind of websites and job sites and searches and all of that sort of stuff. And I was not hearing anything back. And I was kind of wondering what was happening and, losing a little bit of faith. I started working with a recruiter, and the recruiter basically said to me, you know what, it doesn't matter that you've got 5 years of relevant experience because it's not here in Canada. it's going to be looked upon differently. And so basically you're going to have to go back to the bottom and work your way up and take an entry-level job and be competing against people that are coming out of universities. And those people coming out of universities are universities that people know. And so when they look at your resume and your background is from somewhere completely different, you know, there's not that kind of familiarity. And I learned that definitely. And so that was really disheartening and not something that I had expected to hear at all. And I thought, oh my God, we've made a huge mistake. Why did we move to somewhere where we're going to have to backtrack way much in our careers? And what are we going to do now? Like, I mean, we didn't have a lot of money. Like, we came with a little bit of savings. We started, you know, renting an apartment before we had gotten work. And, you know, we started getting anxiety around all of this. And it was not the best, obviously, at the start. And we're like, oh man, you know, we're going to have to go back to Ireland with tail between our legs and say it didn't work out in Canada. So, you know, we felt a little bit sorry. I felt a little bit sorry for myself for the first little bit. And, you know, I kept trying to find stuff. And then eventually I'm like, no, you know what? This is going to work. We're going to make it work. And so I spent a lot of time doing like lots of networking. I'd heard that within kind of the finance realm in Canada, that it was all about getting connections, getting to know people, and basically getting referred into different types of positions. And so I basically spent a lot of time, you know, networking and developing relationships with people, asking everybody that I could meet for a referral to the next person and stuff like that. And eventually, it actually was a connection that I made through one of my new friends that I made here in Canada, who was working at one of the big banks. And I was talking to her about the fact that I'd applied to all these roles. And she said, oh, wait, you know what? I actually know the hiring manager for that particular role. Let me like send an email. And then the next thing, I had an interview, got in front of the people, and, you know, it went really well. And they realized that my experience was great. And you know, I started out at a lower position than I came here hoping for, but it was in the right world, and I certainly had the opportunity to prove myself, and I've worked my way up now at this point to much higher than where I was at the start. And so it all works really well. And the person who hired me initially into the institution that I joined was a really fantastic mentor to me over the years. And I think everything happened for a reason, and it all worked out really well in the end. Now I have, you know, I run a lending team for a new initiative at National Bank, and I have a lot of associates and associate directors and directors of origination reporting through me in this large initiative where we're working with large corporates or large commercial corporate clients across Canada. And it's a fantastic job that I really, really love. And, you know, everything has certainly worked out really well, and I've really enjoyed my career in Canada to date. But it definitely didn't start out easy.
Yeah, so persistence and networking are the secrets to getting through
Absolutely.
that initial for you, right?
Yeah,
Laura, for you, was your experience any different? Was it a very smooth transition from a work perspective?
No, it was really similar, I would say. You know, when I first came here, similarly, I was sending out applications and resumes. I would say also close to the hundreds as well. And then I actually just decided, well, I need to meet people. So I actually just started working in retail. And I shouldn't say just, it was a great job, but it was outside of the field that I had come from. And during that time, I think it was really great because it enabled me to build community, like social connections that I really needed at that point. And then it also gave me some time to also refocus and figure out like what I needed to do professionally. And so I found what helped me land, you know, my position at Diversity, not the one that I'm in now. I've worked up to that over the years, but was, you know, following up with those connections and even doing some cold calls. So I literally would go on the internet most days and just research organizations that had similar values and did similar work to what I had experience in. And I would try and find anyone's, you know, in a position of power, their email address or phone number. And I would just send them a note and just ask them if they would have some time to meet with me. And, you know, and I did that quite a bit, and only one person ever got back to me. And it was the person who ended up giving me my job at Diversity. And she has been my mentor ever since then, and she's now since left diversity, but is still a mentor to me. And so I would say that, you know, that certainly helped. And identifying those mentors, you know, who can guide you and help develop you and give you advice is really helpful too.
That's awesome. Ramya, how about you? Was it a easy or difficult transition?
I'll talk very briefly about my transition because it's very unusual. I came from Geneva, and the week before I came, this happens quite often. I work contracts, right? So my ex-boss in the US said, hey, are you coming back? I have a job for you. And I said, well, I'm not coming back to New York. I'm going to be in Canada. So she said, fine, you know, work for me from here. The second time I went away to Denmark and I came back, I had a colleague from New York who married a Canadian, and she said, hey, what are you doing? I have a job for you. So networking helps. Keep your connections. You know, not everyone finds a full-time job and stays there for 20 years. That doesn't happen very much anymore. It could happen, but keep your networks. So I agree with what Katrina and Laura said. You know, in a perfect world, you know, I would find it boring, but you'd find a job, stay in it for 20 years, and that would be perfect. But in the real world, networking works, and going outside, you both of you said that, and going outside your comfort zone. I liked what you said, Laura, because professionally and personally, you have to push yourself, right? You make those cold calls, you make those connections, you build networks. And one thing is, when you build a network, it's not constant. You have to keep working at your network. So there's not one point that you're networked. It's like, you know, whether it's here, your home country, if you decide you want to go back for a couple of years, it's fine. Keep your networks, you know, keep your energies open, and do conscious things, you know, send out emails at the beginning of the year, wishing people a happy new year. So keep your networks going wherever you are. You have to be consistent in building your networks because that is the important thing. And you have to put yourself out there. You could be an introvert. Find what works for you. You don't have to go to all events. Just figure out a way that works for you. There's no one answer for everyone, right?
And Ramya, sorry, Darrell.
No, go ahead, Laura.
I just want to say I really appreciate what you're saying as far as, you know, the engagement, and since I went through the process of what I went through now, because I'm very privileged to be in a position of influence and have got connections now, I make sure that anytime anyone reaches out to me saying, hi, can we go for a coffee? And I'd like to get to know, you know, the work that you do. And if you can have any advice or connections for me, I make sure that I definitely make time for that. And so it's, you know, that repaying you know, forward is really key as well once you get to the other side.
Can I say absolutely repaying it is important? And you'd also talked about the aspect of mentorship, and that's important because I've benefited from TRIAC, the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council. And guess what? I actually ran a story about them yesterday. I wrote a story about their research study, which says that it's on the website. I can put it in the chat box. It's on canadianimmigrant.ca. Research shows that female immigrants benefit the most from mentoring. So there was a research study, and I actually was a part of the TRIAC mentoring partnership because at one point I felt, well, I wasn't dipping my feet enough in Canada. I had my life elsewhere and my contracts elsewhere. I needed to get connected. So yeah, find those mentoring partnerships as well.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that all three of you mentioned that as part of your strategies to get to where you are now, as mentors played a big part in that, right? So it's, I say not just immigrants, just even Canadians, that should be a staple of how you move ahead in your career. I've got a really interesting question here from the audience I'm going to go to. Laura, I'm going to come to you with this because I think your experience in Australia might help answer this conundrum. So the challenge for a new immigrant to Canada is this sense of having to lose some of their identity from their home country and become, more Canadian, whatever that is. There's a balance and a trade-off there. What advice would you give to someone facing that challenge? Like, how much do you give up versus how much Canadian do you become?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think something that a lot of folks grapple with when they arrive particularly to a country that is so Eurocentric as well and has some inherent biases and encourages folks, to learn the language straight away. Well, not even encourages, but it's how people need to create thriving livelihoods here. I would say don't ever compromise on that. I think it's really important to make sure that you build up like the skills and abilities to be able to engage as you can in community. But I think it is so important to make sure that you speak the language at home, at home, the language that you speak at home, that you speak all the time and pass it on to your children. I think, making sure that you bring the culture into every aspect of your life is what makes these countries like Canada and Australia even richer. And it's interesting, there's a term called code switching, which I know maybe a lot of folks might know about. And I think that's what a lot of migrants tend to do when they're trying to make it in their new country. There's these inherent pressures that they feel, particularly in the workplace, in which they need to show up in a certain way. So they'll switch off parts of them to be able to show up in that way. And so it's sort of like a survival mechanism that tends to happen. And I think people tend to use it as much as they can. But I feel that the reason why I got into the work that I do is to ensure that no one ever has to feel like that they have to shut off a part of them, to feel like that they're a contributing member in this community. So it is a hard balance, and I wish I had a magical answer, but hopefully that's some sense of offering.
Great advice. Thank you, Laura. Katrina, I'm going to come to you with this next audience question. It's really on at the large or high level about systemic discrimination, but this person here has investment banking experience back home and faces this hurdle of being able to translate that into an investment banking job here. In your experience, have you ever systemically experienced sort of, they discount your experience from back home in Ireland, and how did you have to climb that hurdle?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably touched a little bit on that when I was talking about, accessing the job market here in Canada when I first arrived. And I think it was definitely the case that not discrimination per se, but maybe it was a discrimination because it was the fact that my work experience was not counted as being kind of comparable to Canadian, or maybe if it was North American, I guess it would be comparable. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that a lot of people coming from different parts of the world would find that when they're coming into Canada to look for jobs within the finance world. And definitely it's the case that you often have to take a step back. And I mean, I know so many people, all of the people that I know that have moved from different countries and who have applied for work kind of locally here after moving to Canada have had to do that, and have had to often go into roles that are not exactly the role that they wanted, or roles that were, a level or two below. But the one thing I would say is that, good experience is good experience. And so I think the one thing that I have found within my experience working here in a Canadian bank, or now 2 Canadian banks, is the fact that if you're willing to put in the hard work, it will be recognized and your experience will translate. And, but once you're in there, it's very much the case that all opinions are accepted, and it's the case that you're bringing something different to the table and it's celebrated. And I would go back to that previous question just slightly as well, in terms of, do you have to change your background and become more Canadian to fit in here within the work environment? And I would say that in my experience, it's actually something that people celebrate, different people's cultures. And I think that since I've moved to Canada, that I probably celebrate my Irishness far more than I ever did when I was living in Ireland. I never really thought about it before, because I guess there's just not many different cultures, right? So you don't know any better. But here I find that everybody really celebrates, and living and working within an environment where the first team that I worked for, you know, there was somebody from every person was from a different country, and it was something that we celebrated, and we had all of these kind of potlucks where people would bring a dish from their own country, and, you know, people would have different types of experience, and they'd all come together and come up with great ideas, and it was really, really great. So I guess what I would say is, yes, expect coming into Canada from somewhere completely different, even if you've had experience, to expect that you're going to have to take a step back just to prove yourself effectively. And I think that is something that I have experienced myself, and I have seen other people experience. But once you're in, that experience will help to kind of catapult you within the organization, as long as you're willing to work hard for it.
Great. We have one audience question about this session. They're loving this session, by the way, so thank you to all the panelists. And this session is being recorded, so you can absolutely forward it later to clients or friends who might find it a benefit. Yeah, Ramya, go ahead.
Can I quickly add something to what Katrina said? So the fact is, yes, bridging is needed. And technically, I can tell you that companies are not allowed to say Canadian experience needed. It's not legal anymore. If you have any questions about what is legal, what is not, just call the Ontario Human Rights Legal Support Center, or I don't know who or just Google it in your province, you'll find it. So the fact is, we're all smart. We all have skills. I bet everyone on this call is a skilled immigrant. 60%, according to, in the last few years of immigrants being accepted into the country, 58-60 are skilled immigrants. And Immigration Minister Marco Mendocino has said, you know, upcoming 3-year plan, same thing, skilled immigrant category, 60%. I don't know if it'll happen because of COVID, but all of you on this call are looking to learn, build, grow. But then the point is, we have to fix our system a little bit. So Canada is accepting immigrants, but not, there are settlement agencies helping you take that first step. What next? You know, I talked to Uber drivers who were back home, they had MBAs, they come here and they're driving an Uber. So there needs to be a bridge, and you need to talk about these issues with your settlement counselor, or, you know, even do something because these are issues. These are real issues. It's not you who's facing it alone. These are real issues that everyone I interview for stories or stories we feature, this is not a perfect a settlement process or an immigration process. Remember that you are going to have challenges. Sorry, I had to say it. Because...
No, it's wonderful advice.
No, that's a great addition.
No, I think that is so powerful, Ramya, because that's exactly what we see. And, you know, when I talk about my experience, it's you know, from a position of privilege as well, because we know that there's inherent biases, particularly in hiring practices in Canada. It's not just the term of, oh, you don't have Canadian experience. It's also, you know, there have been studies to demonstrate that those inherent biases during hiring practices. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that different people have different privileges based on their names, where they're coming from, and I think, you know, Canada does a good job in promoting multiculturalism, but as far as like actually addressing these systemic injustices, not so much. And we get to see that through the work that we do with community members who are newly arrived. And so I think it's really important not to set folks up with a pretty an expectation. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's heartbreaking, because there are folks who come with such incredible skill sets and qualities, and, you know, the way that Canada processes their foreign credential, pieces is a real failure to the country as well, and its livelihood.
Right.
And we're learning and growing, you know, like, and the first step, diversity, is fabulous, but then goes inclusion. You know, we're just figuring it out. So
yeah.
Rami, I'm going to come to you with this next question, which I've been dying to ask from the very beginning. And there's lots more audience questions that I'm probably not going to get a chance to go to. But we do have some audience members who are not in Canada. There's one in Sao Paulo, Brazil, one in China. For those people thinking of moving to Canada, given your experience, you've already traversed this journey. What, if you were outside and you were planning to come here, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently in order to ease that transition?
How would I do it differently? I think, I did, the networking, the research, I would be, things worked out, but I transferred money to somebody in Toronto. I hadn't seen the house, and I landed at the airport, and I went there, and my friends back in Geneva said, oh, it's going to be an empty plot of land. It was a February winter day. And I went there, and there was a house, and the woman I paid the money to was actually there. But no, I think if there was advice, I would say, do your research, try and make connections. And I think the biggest problem for people is the time that it's taking, right? To get your papers, you're waiting. Your life is in limbo. You're in Brazil, let's say, and you've applied and you're waiting, and you don't know when this is going to come through, right? Darrell, the waiting is the hardest part. So when you're waiting, try and figure out how to continue to live your life wherever you are, and also how you would, I said Brazil because I saw somebody in the chat who said they're in Brazil and planning to come here, but how would you settle in? There are lots of meetup groups. It only becomes real, I think, once you get here. But you could start emailing settlement agencies. You could start looking at market prices. Like do some research. But remember, whatever research you do will not be real till you get here, because you might expect something back home, but then you land here and something doesn't go your way. Just be prepared. I don't want to be negative in any way, but just be realistic about your expectations and continue to live life wherever you are. Do not pause your life in any way. Does that help? That wasn't very
No, it's definitely a great answer. Katrina, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Rami is saying. I think, be realistic and don't assume, like what I did was assume that I would be absolutely desirable and that everyone would be like falling over themselves to hire me. Coming in and having a bit of research in advance is for sure important, but for me the main thing is really establishing those connections, and there are so many resources available to do that, and just starting with the very first one and going from there, like you can establish a network and it grows and grows and grows. It's like wildfire almost once it starts. And I think making those connections and don't just apply for jobs online, and get out there, really utilize people and building those networks and keeping those networks over time will help you to continue to develop your career as well. Yeah, so I would agree with all of that stuff. And, if I were to look back and say, what would I have done differently? I probably wouldn't change anything. I think everything has built me into the person I am today. And, going through tough things in life is what builds you. And I think that all of the immigrants who have come have had to battle and fight their way and really establish a presence for themselves here. And that's something that makes you a stronger person. And so I definitely wouldn't change any of what I've done, because I really think that it was all part of my journey. Although I guess maybe I might have invested in property in Canada in 2012, because I probably have some pretty good equity by now. But, generally speaking, though, I would say, just more of really the same stuff around the networking.
Thanks, Katrina. Laura, any different answer for you?
No, I think Ramya and Katerina hit the nail on the head there. But I just wanted to emphasize, I'm putting on my settlement services hat here. And Ramya, you did touch on it. There are a lot of supports out there, even pre-arrival programs that, so for folks who haven't yet left their home country and are looking at relocating to Canada, that's a really great way to get some information and supports. And so I would recommend, resourcing yourself with the services that are out there that are free of charge.
Okay.
And can I say people are doing that, because when we look at Canadian immigrants traffic, about 20-25% are coming outside from Canada. So people are, I'm sure Gerard has the same thing to say, but people are keeping up to date with information.
Absolutely. Another good audience question here, and I'm going to go, Katrina, to you, because you talked about having initially, things weren't working out, and you had this down moment, but you persisted through it. So this Nishant wants to know, he came here mentally prepared, knowing that things were going to be tough for the first few years, but this impatience creeps in when you're here and you just want to get that job faster than it's happening. And what were your strategies to get through the down moments? How do you stay positive?
I mean, and it's all about trying to stay positive. And I guess for me, I probably spent a little bit of time just saying, oh, this is not great. This sucks. I mean, I have all this experience. I don't know why it's the case that I'm not getting picked up here. Like, what am I going to do? And just feeling down about that. And then something just struck at me and said, you know what? No, I'm not going to allow this to fail. And really just like powering through and really fighting for the opportunities and going out and listening to people. I guess getting yourself involved with and engaged with people in the circles that can be of benefit to you in terms of career opportunities, and then listening to what they have to say. Like, mentors are called mentors for a reason, and you really should listen to how people have been successful and try to kind of not mimic, but you'll probably talk to so many different people and hear so many different perspectives, and it's really figuring out the ways that you personally can be successful in terms of navigating through different types of job opportunities. But staying positive and continuing to fight and not giving up, I think is definitely, I mean, it sounds easier said than done. And I certainly didn't feel this way when I was in the middle of that. But at the same time, I think, trying to keep yourself motivated and just constantly fighting until that opportunity comes along. And I mean, I think Laura mentioned that sometimes that requires taking some different types of roles or going into completely different avenues in order to have those opportunities come to you via some other method than you might have ever expected.
Yeah, you make such an important point though, right? You only see it in hindsight. In the moment, it's really
Exactly.
tough to get through.
Exactly. Absolutely.
But staying positive. Any more advice, Ramya or Laura?
I could, so ask yourself why you're not getting that job, in addition to Katrina's advice. Power through, stay determined, but also take a step back, because a lot of us have the IQ. Maybe we have the EQ, but I've been hearing of this concept, and I can send you a link. I did an article, a columnist wrote for me about CQ. Do you know what CQ is? The cultural quotient. So this is cultural intelligence. So you're here, you have a good level of emotional understanding. Maybe you're not getting picked up because, ask yourself, are you going to the interview and coming across as too domineering? Are you coming across as desperate? I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there. Just do a little bit research, look at cultural intelligence. This is the appreciation of differences. Is this how interviews would work in Canada? Is this how a workplace, if you're working in a workplace, you're not getting promoted, is it because you're sensitive and able to navigate situations? So take a step back, go forward, don't give up, but also look at why these things are happening. Because one is the CQ aspect of it, just find your cultural quotient, or I don't know what people are calling it, social quotient, EQ. And the other is be open to learning. You were a successful, is it your attitude? Because I had a bit of that. And you could be a successful stockbroker in Shanghai. You could be the head of an ad agency in Mumbai. I've heard people, when I interview them for stories, they say, well, I'm here. I was the head of an ad agency. I'm here. I can't even find a job in an ad agency. But that's okay. You have to rebuild, and you have to start it with a job that's not on par. And if you don't know things, and if you have to unlearn things, it's okay. Unlearn, learn, because your goal is to build a career here, a life here. It's okay if it takes you a couple of years longer than you expected it to take.
Great. Yeah, I've been hearing CQ more and more and more in my
Yeah.
circle, in my professional circle. So it's such an important thing. Laura, anything to add to that in terms of staying positive during these tougher times, during transitions?
Yeah, it can be so demotivating when you don't see progression, and you've had a vision for yourself in this new place. And you know, I think a big one, like Katrina mentioned, around you know, while you're still looking at landing that optimal position, what other aspects of your life can you also focus on and enjoy? I think that's what I was really able to do. And that could include things like, you know, contributing to your community, particular hobbies or skill sets that you can build out in the meantime. You know, just to focus on some other development in other areas that you may not be seeing in the job search, just to keep yourself motivated and centered, and to know your worth. You know, it can be really demoralizing and devaluing. So it's really important to continue to see your own worth and to show up in the community, in the world that way.
You know, the hour has just flown by. This has been an amazing conversation. So I want to thank Laura, Ramya, and Katrina for the time to share your advice and sharing your journeys with us. There's so many questions I wasn't able to get to, but we're out of time. So I want to thank you again. Thanks very much to WoodGreen Community Connections and New Canadians for hosting us. And I have a few announcements before we wrap things up. The first is that this series with New Canadians Café New Canadians is an ongoing series. You can tune into their website to find out when the next one is, or Gerard might pull up a slide. There it is, the 24th of June, Immigrant Journey Amid the New Normal. I've heard Gertrude host some sessions before. She's amazing. So if you have the time, please join into that. To get updates, you can also follow New Canadians on multiple social media channels, and you can also subscribe to their newsletter, which is on the screen here. One small request for those people in the audience is you're going to get a very quick survey at the end of this. If you can just take a few minutes to fill that out and provide feedback to New Canadians. They're always improving on their series and really look forward to receiving your feedback. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. This has been, again, an amazing conversation. Thank all the panelists. Have a good evening and stay safe, everyone.